The intro for this one is easy. MAGA is a lie. I mean, I don't mean their policies or the words of their presidents. Well, I do mean their policies and the words of their presidents, but that's not what this episode is about. Because in those places, there are lies in abundance. So many lies, but we don't have time for that. I'm talking about the four letters MAGA, what they represent and why they are a complete and total lie. How do I know? Well, amongst other things, the Bible tells me so. Welcome to the Sky Pilot podcast that explores questions of faith, spirituality, and religion. I'm Dan Matthews, and I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy the questions. Welcome to the podcast where every question is an invitation into a spiritual quest, and you're invited along for the journey. Hi, I'm Dan, this is Quark, and we're your co-pilots for today's spiritual adventure. Welcome to Sky Pilot Faith Quest. Let's blast off. Look, I'm openly going to admit that I hear the name of Trump's movement, MAGA, and I understand it to be a dog whistle.
I beg your pardon, dog whistle?
Yeah, dog whistle is a term often used in politics to mean coded language. A politician uses a word or a phrase that the insiders know the meaning of, but it's been carefully chosen to escape the notice and understanding of outsiders who, it is hoped, will miss its true meaning. So in the case of MAGA, making America great sounds aspirational, doesn't it? But add the word again, and suddenly you're implying a return to something in the past. Many insiders hear the term MAGA and understand it to mean a return to a less diverse, less open, less compassionate time. You know, one when men ran things and women stayed home.
The non-white people had limited roles of power in society.
Yeah, exactly. So today we're going to look at greatness, its meaning, and what it would look like if we truly aspired to it.
Oh yes, can we start with the Bible? Specifically, did Jesus even talk about this?
Way ahead of you, Quark. There's a great story in the Bible in which Jesus talks about striving for greatness and what achieving it might look like. The story starts with a bid for power by two of his disciples, James and John. They pull Jesus aside and they ask Jesus that when he comes into his power, they want to be appointed special places. They want to be appointed the two seats, one on his left, one on his right. You know, when he comes into his authority, giving them special authority and special places of power. The other disciples, well, they find out that they've made this bid for power, and they are ticked with James and John. Well, here's the rest of the story from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10. When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Instead, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be a slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." All right, so just to recap, greatness, according to Jesus, is easily recognized by humility, service, and sacrifice.
So what would Jesus want it to look like if we were to make America great?
Yeah, okay, first, I think it's pretty clear that Jesus really wouldn't care about making America great. What he does care about is what it looks like if we, his followers, want to aspire for greatness. Jesus wants us to know, want to be great? Learn to serve one another. Now, let's turn to Trump. Or in this case, let's turn to Trump's son and see what we can learn, Don Jr. Don Jr. has spoken to this idea of biblical sacrificial living, and he said, quote, "We've turned the other cheek," and I understand sort of the biblical reference. I understand the mentality, but it's gotten us nothing, okay? It's gotten us nothing while we've ceded ground in every major institution. Now, to be fair to Don Jr., and who doesn't want to be fair to Don Jr., I think his statement here is not stepping away from his father's philosophy for MAGA, but is very much stepping into it, leaning into it. So it's time to be more demanding, is the point. It's time to be a winner. And to Donald Trump, winning has a very specific meaning. It means whoever you are dealing with must be defeated. For you to win in business, in life, in politics, for you to win means someone else must be losing, or by definition, you aren't winning. I read a really interesting interview recently with a professor at a law school who specializes in teaching negotiating, David Honig, who is a full-time practicing lawyer but also teaches negotiating in the law school of Indiana University. First, he wants us to understand that there are two distinct styles of bargaining or negotiating. One is called distributive, the other is called integrative. And he said Trump very clearly has one style of, one understanding of negotiating. Trump's only style of bargaining is distributive. Think of distributive bargaining like this. Two hungry people sit down to negotiate over a whole pie. They're trying to decide who gets how much of the pie. And every slice that one of the person gets, the other person obviously is not getting. Whoever gets the most wins, period. That's distributive bargaining in a nutshell.
Well, isn't that the nature of business? In order to win, you must defeat everyone else.
Well, in truth, it is only one style of negotiating. And it's really only effective in kind of very specific cases, like cases where you're never going to work in that market or with those people again. So let me give you an example. Say you're starting a company and you need 10 big manufacturing machines to go into your factory. You travel to the town where the company's headquarters are and the machines are manufactured, and you begin to negotiate for the purchase of those 10 machines. The expected life of these machines is probably longer than you're going to own the company, so the only goal for you is to get the best deal possible. As long as you get a good deal and you walk away with exactly what you want, what you need, you don't really care what happens to that company as a result of the deal. If you bankrupted them, who cares? You won't deal with them again. You got what you needed. Now, I tell it in that extreme way because Trump very much understands negotiating and deal-making to be exactly like this. It's a zero-sum game.
Zero-sum game?
Yeah, it's a name for a situation where one person's loss is exactly equal to the other person's gain. So you're talking about the pie. You get a slice of pie, that's a piece of pie the other person doesn't get. So you're up one, they're down one. So if you're negotiating a business deal and it nets you an additional 1,000, the other person loses that 1,000. So your positive number and their negative number equally offset. Hence the name zero sum. And people who have dealt with Trump, read his books, listened to his speeches, studied his business dealings.
Like Professor Honig.
Yes, like Professor Honig. They say this is very much his style. And matter of fact, his sole understanding of how business deals and negotiating works. That's what he was taught by his father. Every business deal has a winner and a loser, and your job is to be the winner and make sure the other person is a loser. But there are different kinds of deals. Deals where each person understands that they have a mutual health interest for the other person that they're negotiating with. That the benefit of both is a good thing. Honig calls this integrative bargaining. A baker and a catering company work out a deal. There aren't limited resources over which they are fighting. Matter of fact, they are trying to create a deal that is beneficial for both of them. Get the right deal, and both of their boats rise with the tide. Professor Honig said that the truth is the vast majority of business deals are not zero-sum. The difference between these two styles plays out in all sorts of markets. Back in the late 1970s, there was a TV show called Three's Company. The original three stars were John Ritter, Joyce DeWitt, and Suzanne Summers. As the show became more popular, Suzanne Summers made a bid for more money. Her star was rising, the public was getting more interested in her, and she figured her popularity, because it was on the rise, she should be paid more than anyone else. If she was the most popular, which she believed she was, she should get the lion's share of the money, which did not sit well with her fellow cast members or the production company. Ultimately, this led to her departure from the show and was actually pretty damaging for her career and her image.
But that is just the way show business works.
Yeah, you would think so, but is it? When the TV show Friends was brand new series, just newly on television, each of the newly hired actors on the sitcom was paid something different, each paid according to the perceived value that they had before joining the show. Now, here's the interesting thing. One of the actors, David Schwimmer, quickly decided that it would be best if they tied their contracts together. They would, he hoped, in the future all be paid the same thing. He felt this was the best for their long-term success as a group, so he pushed his co-stars to agree that everyone would be getting paid the same thing, exactly the same thing in the future.
Yes, he was probably the lowest paid in the group and just trying to bring his own salary up, wasn't he?
Actually, David Schwimmer and Jennifer Aniston both were the two highest paid people on the cast, and they both took a pay cut in order to equalize salaries. The plan, as David Schwimmer presented it to his fellow actors, was to see their success as being tied together rather than competing with each other.
Did it work?
Yeah. It's generally believed that it had a lot to do with the successful chemistry of the show and therefore the financial success of the show. During the final 2 seasons of Friends, I think it ran for 10, so just the final 2 seasons of Friends, every member of the cast made $1 million an episode each. That's 42 episodes in those 2 seasons alone. Not bad for a group of people who decided not to compete with each other, but to see their success as tied to one another. So first, I want to say that Donald Trump has very limited and skewed view of what greatness means. It is always measured ultimately at an individual level. Did I get more than you? Can I walk away from the negotiating table feeling that I won? And equally important for Donald Trump, you lost. This is how he understands our relationships with other nations. This is how he understands his own role in politics. Remember, when this whole political thing is played out, he will judge its success and his success by how much he took away from the table compared to everyone else. And make no mistake, that includes the American public.
But to be fair, matching up politics is a bit different from business, isn't it?
Yeah, is national politics different than business? Okay, well, maybe 2 points. Trump negotiates with other nations as if it is distributive bargaining. We have soybeans. China wants to buy soybeans. Trump believes that we get to set the price, and China takes the deal or goes without soybeans. Now, Professor Honig uses this example as Trump not understanding the international landscape and the way that type of market works. He makes the point, negotiations aren't binary. China's choices aren't A, buy soybeans from the U.S. farmers, or B, don't buy soybeans. They can also C, buy soybeans from Russia, or Argentina, or Brazil, or Canada, etc. That completely strips the distributive bargainer of his power to win or lose, to control the negotiation. All of Trump's tariffs are creative from the standpoint that we have all the power and everything to win, and the other sides have no other options but to capitulate to our demands, which is inherently mistaken, as we've just seen. Okay, with all of this as a backdrop, let's talk about the word great. From an American's point of view, what are our moments of true greatness? Now, Trump wants to take us back to greatness, so if we're going back to the greatness, let's talk about what our moments of greatness were. From an American's point of view, again, what are those moments of true greatness? I grew up hearing that the United States is the greatest nation on earth. Now, I'll admit that even using that phrasing has, I admit, some problems.
Are you trying to make people angry?
No, nothing of the sort. Look, my point is that greatest, in this case, is a very complex term. Well, and it needs to be defined. When you say, we are the greatest nation, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the largest economy in the world? Are you talking about the largest military in the world? Then yes, we are number one in both of those 2 categories. Are you talking about the highest disposable income per household? I think we're number 1 in that one too. But are you talking about infant mortality rate? Because we aren't even close on that one in terms of infant mortality rate. We're not even in the top 10. We rank 33.
What?
Yeah, exactly. But let's run with the idea of our greatness and see where it leads us, since our president is talking about restoring us to greatness. As an American, if someone asks you to describe what makes America great, what are our, more importantly, defining moments of greatness, what would What would your answer be, Quark? What would you say?
Oh, that's easy. Hamburgers, barbecue, apple pie, macaroni and cheese, and buffalo wings.
Are you hungry, Quark? Okay, in a slightly less food-focused direction, when I was growing up, I think most Americans would have said that the greatest moment in American history, when we really showed our greatness, was during World War II. Now, for those of you who are American history buffs and just love to argue the details and want to debate this question at the moment, I'm not really talking about history right now. I'm talking about American mythology, meaning the stories that make us who we are. I mean, some of the stories we tell about George Washington may be true, others maybe not, but they are part of our national mythology, again, meaning the stories we tell to help explain who we are and how we see ourselves and who we aspire to be in the future. In my youth growing up, World War II was the time we looked back on as being great, as having our greatest moments, as having amazing determination, and having made a difference in the world through our sacrifice. Matter of fact, I will talk about this more in a minute, but this generation, the World War II generation, has been called the greatest generation of our nation's history. By the way, General Kelly, one of Trump's chiefs of staff in his first administration, has said that during a visit to Europe, it was suggested that Trump visit a cemetery. But Trump did not want to visit cemeteries of American soldiers who fought and died in World War II because, according to Trump, because they died made them suckers and losers. And by the way, suckers and losers, according to General Kelly, were words that were actually used by him in that conversation. Okay, our time during World War II has been raised to a mythical level because it was a time in which we made enormous sacrifices. There's no doubt about that. Enormous sacrifices for the greater good. Not just for our own nation, but we helped put things right in the world. We stepped forward to help and restore hope when it was perceived that many in the world had lost hope. Now, let me just say at this point, if you're British, please don't leave me angry comments down below. Okay, go ahead if you really want to. Please don't take offense. You may bristle at the description I've given, but know that I'm really talking about the way we have framed and understood our role in World War II, and I'm not in any way intending to diminish your story of sacrifice and tenacity, because it was amazing. Okay, let's go further back in our search for greatness to the founding of our nation. Our nation was founded on some, remarkable principles, wonderful, defining principles. Want to know what they are? Well, just look at the Constitution. One of the remarkable things about the Constitution of the United States is that it's founded on some lofty ideals: protection of rights, equality amongst the citizens. Even our Pledge of Allegiance, if we want to look at that, speaks of liberty and justice for all. Want to know who we are when we are at our greatest? It's when we are defending the liberty and equality of all our citizens.
I know you were speaking of your mythical best, but not everyone was treated equally in those days of old, just to be honest.
Oh, absolutely. You're correct. Thank you. And those were horrible and tragic mistakes we made along the way in our nation's history. And having said that, I think many of us would agree that one of the defining moments of greatness would be the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was horrible that it took so long and so many people suffered for us to get there. But again, also for many people, this was a moment, at least of somewhat of triumph in the history of our nation, because amongst other things, it meant that we acknowledged our mistake and made an attempt to correct them, again, moving the needle even closer to our ideal of liberty and justice for all. So let me be clear. I would argue that every single great moment in the history of our nation was great because it stepped away from the ideal of a zero-sum game and made choices for the greater good. Now, Tom Brokaw, I said I'd mention this later. Here it comes. Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. He was talking about that generation that fought in World War II.
Curious, according to Brokaw, what made them the greatest generation?
Yeah, well, he said a number of things about them. They had a strong sense of duty. They willingly participated in self-sacrifice for the benefit of others. They had a strong trait of humility. He said, unlike any other generation before, Again, according to him, they didn't seek recognition for the sacrifices they made. They were very family and community focused. They passed up opportunities for personal gain for the benefit of their families and their community. There was a deep-seated focus on integrity. They valued honesty and discipline. In short, they held in high regard humility, sacrifice, and service. Do those sound familiar? Now, here's what I would argue. Every single moment from our history that I have named, the moment was notable and is remembered and heralded because of the greatness of a large group of people who also could be defined by those same guiding traits laid out by Brokaw in his book about the greatest generation.
Even the civil rights movement?
Oh, absolutely. But maybe not in the same way as World War II and that generation. The story we tell of World War II and that generation is that everyone joined in. Now, I'm sure there were dissenters. I'm sure that isn't true, how it actually played out, but that's how we tell the story. Nobody tells the story of the struggle for civil rights in our country in that way. Nobody says, oh, everybody was on board. The civil rights movement was every bit run, driven, and made possible by, well, those same traits named by Brokaw, and of course, said by Jesus to his disciples. It just wasn't the nation as a whole. It was a much smaller group of courageous, tenacious, and visionary people who forced us as a nation to look in a mirror and acknowledge who we were and ultimately demand and then receive change. I would argue that every moment of greatness in our nation's history can be told as a group of people who willingly sacrificed for the greater good of others. From our founding to the civil rights movement, to World War II, and lots of other examples, they were all marked by humility, service, vision, and sacrifice.
So what is the lie of MAGA?
The lie is that Trump promises to make America great again. But in no way is he using any definition of greatness that our ancestors who showed true greatness would recognize. And that's true of our national ancestors. It's also true of our religious and spiritual ancestors. From our founding fathers to those who shaped the drive for justice during the civil rights movement, to the women who fought and earned suffrage, and including Jesus Christ in his own words from the Bible, Jesus who told us, want to be considered great? You must be willing to be a servant of others and not seek power over them.
Yeah, that's not Trump.
World War II gave us an example of courageous people who served, fought, sacrificed, often anonymously, and many died, again, anonymously, so that the world could be a better place.
Okay, not him either.
The civil rights movement embodied the willingness to live through hardship, suffering, and walk bravely across a bridge that may very well cost you your life in order to ensure a better world for the next generation.
Still not him.
Look, here's my point. I have felt like the two words great again is, as I said, those words are a dog whistle, hearkening back to a time where we weren't as great a country, but white men knew a lot more power and women and minorities a lot less. But even aside from that, forget the dog whistle argument. If the goal of our president is to make America great again, then one could and should look at what we have had as our greatest moments in our nation. What were the qualities that made those moments so great? And then ask one simple question. Is that what we're getting right now? And that's all for today. One last thing. As I was writing this, I kept thinking of an American president, arguably his most famous speech he ever gave. So instead of my final parting words, I will leave you with that as a stark reminder of the difference between this administration and that previous president's call to greatness for us and for the whole world.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
Thanks for joining us here today and being part of the SkyPilot Faith Quest community. This is a great place to ask questions you wouldn't feel comfortable or safe asking in other places. And remember, the sign of a strong faith, solid religion, or healthy spiritual journey is not certainty, but that you keep asking questions.